Welcome to What's Your Point with Colin Barnes and Graham Mills. In this series of podcasts, we will use a famous statement or quote from the world of sport to start our conversation and bring light to a topic. Our goal is to dispel myths and make the truth stick. Come join us in the discussion. This is our second podcast in the series that addresses the argument of winning versus development. We first discussed how winning was linked and connected to development. This episode will focus more on how the two are separate from each other. As a reminder, our quote is, "Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing." Here's what we had to say. And this is the perfect visual change. So before we had that line connecting them and they were kind of, going towards each other. Now, they're such polar opposites. If we say we've got winning and we've got development next to each other, but in fact, their arrows are going further away. We're like the universe. We're ever expanding away from each other. We're never going to be as close as we once were. That gets played out in the extremes of what coaches look like. We get what you're talking about in the fact that, okay, well, now it's about development. Well, we have that separation. Now when coaches have to make that comment in these games where it's all about development, now we're going to this tournament. Now it's about winning. And all of those markers for playing time, how many times someone starts, the roster size of things, all those things start to come into, fruition. And when I look at this, where they're so different, it all comes in. I think you said at the beginning, what are the objectives? What is it that you're trying to get out of it? So let's take this winning is one side. The objective is definitely get the result. It is the product at the end. No matter what it takes, let's get it. While the process is about, okay, we're gonna try these things to increase learning for maybe individual players, maybe it's for team development, maybe it's for a group of players, whatever it may be. Here's our long-term, curriculum. In this year, we're trying to understand I'm assuming at the 13s and 12s where you're working, understanding zonal defending is probably, it's good, but now they're on a bigger pitch. The spacing's different. So we're really going to understand how we pass on players, how when one steps forward, the others drop back and squeeze in, like all those little things that it takes a long time to develop that. Well, if you're just going to work on that, then you're forgetting some other factors and you might not actually win the game, but you're at least trying to develop those aspects. The best example, and oh my gosh, it's this projection from Pep. Pep, great job. You changed the game and you absolutely screwed some of our coaches at the same time. We've got to play out of the back. And we get coaches that will play out of the back on a goal kick ad nauseum, even though their players aren't ready for it, for the sake of learning how to play out of the back. And their team loses 15-0, and they're still trying to play out of the back at 15-0, even though the other team is high pressing and won't let them out and are more athletic. These polar extremes are rampant in the game. Maybe I'm wrong. Does that occur? Do you see that on the pitch? Even today, everyone's trying to develop playing out of the back, and it's the thing to do. We must develop it, but at the sake of being able to be successful at it.
I think it's a way of playing that's become very vogue in academy football. So we've talked about academy performance plans and philosophies and stuff, and I would imagine the vast majority of academies would say that their philosophy is to play out from the back through the thirds, play a high press out of possession. So yeah, generally speaking, most academies play the same sort of way. You do get a couple that maybe a bit more direct in their style or do things slightly different. but it's definitely become quite vogue to do it. And you do see some coaches and some clubs that are insistent on it. So MK Dons used to be very much like that. So they would play out from the back at any scoreline. So even if they were losing heavily, they'd still play out from the back. And in one respect, I sort of admire that. I admire the sticking to what you believe in. And then in other respects, when you see if it's a young age group and it's their big day of the weekend and parents are there to watch them play and stuff, and they don't want to be coming off a pitch having lost quite heavily, and the striker rarely touches the ball because it never really gets to them. So you've got to weigh that up, I guess. But I think in development, the younger ages, so when you're working foundation youth development and even sort of the top end of youth development, it is long term. So it doesn't matter about the result today. Players aren't going to be defined on whether they won on a Sunday against another team now. It's with a view of long-term development. So the closer you get to them being a senior or a professional football player, then it becomes more short-term. So do they understand their roles and responsibilities? Do they know when to play out from the back and why they're doing it? Whereas, with the younger age groups, I guess you're trying to establish and embed some principles that you want them to be brave enough to adhere to.
Totally agree. I know how this is going to come across, but I have to ask the question. Because at the youth level, whether you're in an academy system in the FP phase or you're in a grassroots, there is going to be inequalities in aging or maturation and talent. You are going to come across a team that you are far inferior in certain aspects, and maturation is important when it comes to building out of the back. If a young kid cannot play a ball over the top of another player and the other player cannot control that ball, then yes, a team can go and press, they can suffocate them and they can do it. Does a player learn from being unsuccessful repeatedly over and over again? Where does the breaking point occur?
Yeah, it's gonna the trade-off. If they're technically and tactically not capable of performing what you're asking them to do, then psychologically there's going to be a trade-off. So you've talked about motivational climates, and if they're repeatedly getting the ball nicked off them and conceding, then that motivation is going to start to dwindle. I guess for me, the problem with playing out from the back is the stereotypical playing, what people understand as playing out from the back. It's the two centre-backs splitting. It used to be down the sides of the 18-yard box. It's now
inside,
off the apex of the 6-yard box, the number 4 on the edge of the box, full-backs high and wide. That's and it's the pass to the centre-back and trying to play, Barcelona trying to play. But there's different ways to playing out from the back. If we're playing against a full press and they're going locking on man for man, do we bring our 8 and our 10 in and draw them underneath the ball and then try and play over into the 9 who drops into the pocket? Or do we run them away and take them all the way, as far away as possible? Hopefully they'll come and mark us. If they don't, then we can play over, and that's where our overload is. If they do come with us, now that affords the two centre-backs the space to be able to get on the ball and make a decision. So I think it's the vision of what when you say playing out from the back, we all imagine Barcelona and short 5-10 yard passes around our goal mouth and stuff. But really, it's having a plan A, plan B, plan C, to enable us to play out from the back. A clipped ball into the second line is still playing out from the back.
Yeah.
Because it's not an aimless hoof up the pitch just to get the ball away from our goal. It's
long
we're
pass,
trying to play. So it's how you perceive and define playing out from the back. And I think if you're a good coach, if plan A doesn't work because the opposition are doing something, have you got the ability to change things slightly to enable your teams to have success but still adhere to what you want them to do?
Okay, change my opinion. My opinion is this. I hear a coach come off the pitch. Hey, how'd the game go? Oh, we were brilliant. We had, 85% possession.
Yeah.
We made 400 passes. They couldn't stop us building out of the back. And then you go, what was the score? And then they go, 8-0. And you go, what? Okay, so there, and again, your idea of what do you define success is depends on the context, depends on the age group, depends on a whole host of factors. But there are so many dangers in adults watching Pep, watching back when it was Arsene Wenger at Arsenal. They see this idealization of the game, and then they project it onto their younger players and assume that that's how they should play. And there's kind of a forgotten understanding that learning has to occur, and that we use this term developmentally appropriate, yet we don't know what it really means in how we transfer the big game down to the small game. And so I hear so many coaches go, oh yeah, we did this, and this. And yet there wasn't any other success, which is where I guess it kind of merges in. I mean, change my opinion on this aspect, on how we can get away from those. I'd rather lose, and I'm not talking down to you. I'm just saying, I would rather lose trying to play out of the back with my principles than.
Yeah, I think the first bit that you referred to is the narrative that you put on it. We had the most possession. We were the most dominant team. If you lost 8-0, there's probably a reason, despite the defeats and despite the good stuff that you did in the game, there's probably a reason why that occurred. So I guess it's the narrative and the reflection of the coach to be able to understand those things. So are they just talking about the headline things rather than, they might have had good possession, but they lacked care and attention and detail in the final action to actually penetrate. So the approach play was really good, but there's things they need to work on. So if they're reflecting on things like that, then that's okay. But if it's all really, really good, but then they lost 8-0, they're obviously missing the detail that is going to make them hopefully a better coach and the team better at performing what they want them to do. With regards to, I think it's a problem in sport. Football generally, because it's the most popular sport, it's always on TV and it's the country's number one sport. So people watch things, see things, pick things up on social media, and then they might be a parent coach working with an under-9s group and then say, I'm going to go and do that. They watch Monday night football, and Tuesday night they're trying to do rotations and positional play with the under-9s. That's the problem, is that people try and take what they see at the senior level and apply it to, and we know, long-term athlete development, age and stage appropriate coaching and content, it doesn't work, and it shouldn't work. So, a kid that's just learned to cycle, you wouldn't give them an adult's bike just because they know how to cycle and expect them to get on it. And, it's like football. You see the adult football and then you go, right, I'm going to play that with the under-9s. They can't do it. They're not at that level. They might still need the stabilizers and the scaffolding and the support that they need at that age and stage. So, there's a problem. I think we've talked about this on previous podcasts, is that we shouldn't just be applying what we see on the TV to youth football, because it's completely out of context of their capabilities, their maturation, their game understanding at that age, and what's important. Now, how you address that is a big question. That's going to take probably more than 3 podcasts. But I guess one problem for me is probably one of the best things that I did in my development was the FA Youth Awards. So I know you've got a similar type qualification in America around sort of elite coaching and what that looks like.
It was our best license award.
Yeah.
Everyone says they go through the C, the B, the A, and the national goalkeeper license, and they come out and they all say the National Youth Award was the best one. Is that a similar experience over here?
Yeah, that was sort of the point that I was coming on to was exactly that. Is that I did the B license, the A license, and you go and it's very senior. It's about systems, strategies, tactics, winning games. You did when I did it, it was 10 days straight, and you were on the training ground day after day, taking part in sessions, and by the end of it, you were absolutely exhausted. And it was pass or fail. And the youth awards was something that was introduced, and it was quite innovative at its time. It was talking about the things that we're talking about, but how young people learn, the brain development and what we need to consider when they're at certain age groups, and what the effects during growth and maturation might be, and all the things that I wasn't aware of. I probably took more from that pathway, the youth awards and the advanced youth award, than I did from the other qualifications I've done. But yet they've now taken that away and almost embedded it within the level 2 B license and the A license, and it doesn't seem right because it's so important. And if we're going to get to the bottom of this winning versus development, and actually start to understand that depending on the age group you're working with and the context and the environment and level, they don't have to be competing. They can be one and the same.
Yeah.
And I thought the Youth Award did a really good job of articulating that. And it's just a shame to see, and by all accounts, you've done it in America as well.
And I did mine, I think, and it was like you, it was after I'd had my A, I guess, for 5 years before I went and did the youth. And it was much of the same experience. They actually, because it was run by a different organization. So U.S. Soccer does the A's and the B's. Then it was U.S. Youth Soccer that ran the award, because they were the ones who developed it. And there were some really good coach educators with Sam Snow and the guys from Ohio University who had created it. And tremendous. There's some good reads on how they developed it. It went away. And now, luckily, it's been able to come back. So thankful to those guys for bringing it. But for those of you who don't know, the psychology, and when we use this term development, we're really talking about child development, where we have the child or the person is broken up into 3 domains: the affective, which is their emotions, their psychology, and things like that. Then there's the cognitive development, their understanding of abstract versus concrete things. And then there's the psychomotor, their actual movement. So we learn, as you did, I was talking to a lecturer about us who teaches PE, and he was talking about, our listeners and other coaches may not know about the extremities of little kids. They, at 6 years old, they don't want a jacket on their hands, but it takes a long time. And they won't feel that they're getting either really, really hot or really, really cold. The cognitive understanding, meaning this abstract versus concrete, we can't ask kids to share things if they're still in the egocentric, it's me, me, me. No. That ball has my name on it. That is my ball. I'm not playing with anyone else's ball. Like, we've got to be able to understand, and that's how it relates to all of the tactics that we bring in. The reason for the format is, players at 10 years old and getting into 11 are really just becoming aware of how 3 people work together. At 8 years old, they've just got a buddy. And so everything's centered around the pairs. At 6 years old, it's all about the me. So there's this development as well as the physical development and, the coordination. We can talk about growth, maturation, peak, velocity, height, and things like that. And so there's reasons for all of these things occurring. So going back to our pendulum swing, the reason we came into this hyper participation is not about the winning, is because of what we grew up in. So do we still see the extreme coach. So if I took the opinion before, all right, there's too many of these coaches that are forgetting the winning side. We also need to address all those coaches that make those decisions where it is about the winning and less about the learning or the development of players. How frequent does it come out, or is it subverted as you kind of suggested earlier?
Yes, I think that there's a quote by Cushion. I think I've shared it with you about people or coaches from ex-professional background tend to recycle what they've experienced. So if you've played for Alex Ferguson, so Ryan Giggs, for example, will have learned a lot, having been a one club man, learned a lot from him, and he'll start to replicate a lot of stuff that Ferguson's done. So I think we've had experience of, certainly when I was growing up, it was all about winning. It was 11v11 at a young age, and probably in my early stages of coaching until the FA Youth Awards came along, I probably would have been down that route. And I was a director of a college team, and we got to 5 national finals in 6 years. But if I look back at what I was coaching like, it was very it was very structured, it was very rigid, it was very organised, it was set up to win. We played good football, but it was about winning. And obviously we had success. So it almost validated what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't then until the FA Youth Awards that came afterwards, and then working in academies, that I maybe started to question, because as the director of a college team, I had control over the philosophy, the curriculum, whatever I could, the holistic 4-corner model. It was what I wanted to do. Whereas when you go into an academy, the philosophy is dictated to you. So you have to play the club way. The sports science provision and program is dictated to you. So the variables that I could control in my own environment as a college director, I didn't. In an academy, you don't really have the control over a lot of those variables. So if my focus is just on winning, and setting an environment where we're just about winning, because I can't tweak those variables and change and adjust them to align to that, there's this, it doesn't work. The relationship doesn't quite work. So if I'm just focused on winning, the problem is that if we're not winning, the players are looking at me thinking, like, this isn't, it's like the Allardyce effect that you've referred to before. It often gets parachuted in, get wins quickly, but it tails off. It doesn't last very long because of the environment, the culture that you set. So that's where I sort of learned that I can't have that approach when I've got to align myself to the philosophy and different ways that the club want to do things. So that's where I started to value development. And now I've probably, not the pendulum, I've not gone completely all development now, but I'm somewhere in the middle. I want the players to compete. I want the players to want to win. But I don't want them to measure and define themselves just on the result. I want them to understand, if they've been successful, why, and if they've lost, why. And if they can focus on their individual development needs and their targets and evidence some successful progress towards them, that might be more valuable or powerful than winning a one-off game. So I'm sort of there in the middle, and I guess your question, I don't know how we address the balance across the whole football landscape.
Well, okay, so we take this this idea, we go into every match, and if we go with this ego and task, orientation, every match, regardless of the match, you should go in, and I think every coach kind of does this. There's a standard. We use different terms, really. There's a standard that we expect you. Most coaches say that the standard is high work ethic, high work rate, tackling, and whatever. Here's what we expect you. There's the task coming out. Yes, it could be about the skill. It could be about your passing rate, your finishing, your whatever. But there's a standard that you're comparing against yourself. Then it becomes into the how much of the ego do you take in? And I think this is where the each coach has to evaluate it on yourself to go. am I comparing us to this team on this day, which is absolutely a good thing when it is a comparable team. Your team and my team play against each other twice a year. It's always within a goal, or we have a tie. We're always similar abilities. We can definitely compare when we know that the levels are very similar. We can compare, well, sorry, we didn't beat them today, because we know we should be thereabouts. But when I go and play against, I can distinctly remember it. I was with this Alabama team. I was thinking I was the greatest thing ever, and we played Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo beat us 13-0.
Yeah.
We had internationals from Ghana. We then went and played the U.S. internationals under 17s at the time, and I think we only lost 3-0. So we weren't a bad side technically, but we lost 13-0. I wanted to quit playing football. I was like, okay, I'm 16 years old. I'm never going to make it. Well, in actuality, I shouldn't compare myself against everyone. In that case, I need to compare against myself, and I can then measure to see how far away I am from that next level. Yeah. Conversely, we go and play against certain teams, and we beat them 13-0. Okay, now that egocentric, we just throw that out there. Let's just operate off of the task. Let's only worry about what I can control into my level. And this is what, for anyone that knows me before, my affinity and somewhat infatuation with Nick Saban at Alabama. He talks about the process, and I'll say process intentionally in the American term. He's dedicated to it. So it doesn't matter what the score is. He's the coach on the sideline that is changing to the demands of the game. Mm-hmm. So his team is playing against, I can remember it to this day, it was one of the worst games to ever watch. It was 2000, I think, must have been 2012, November of 2012. And they played against Johnny Manziel. They called him Johnny Football. He eventually went and won the Heisman, and they beat Alabama. Well, he was making the most ridiculous plays. He was avoiding sacks, throwing up Hail Marys, and somehow they were scoring. He didn't jump on their case. He was actually consoling and helping and trying to educate during those moments. He was showing compassion, almost empathy even. Yet they're in the national championship game 2 months later. They're up, I think, like 35-14, like huge amount. And he is just on fire yelling. In fact, he becomes the yelling coach. The standards aren't good enough. I can't believe you, the hairdryer that we were talking about with Sir Alex. He turns into that coach when the team's winning. He's like got the polar opposites of what we tend to see. And so it's knowing when to use the ego and when to use the task. Yeah. And that's the hard. I don't know if everyone thinks about those moments of going, you know what, in this moment, we need to worry about ourselves versus, okay, this is the moment we can actually compare ourselves against others. Yeah. And I'm gonna use my reactions to help them frame. I think you say, how you sell it, but how you frame the information that's coming out. Yeah. I think that's the important part, because I think a lot of coaches get it wrong in the sense that once they're up 6-0, they stop doing anything. They sit on the sideline, they start joking around with their players, and they ignore what's going on the field. Tell me, is that a common thing? Do you see that? Or?
Yeah, again, it depends on the individual. Some coaches, when they're 6-0 up, are still driving because it's that ego thing. They want to score as many goals as they possibly can. And some, like you say, will sort of disconnect from the game a little bit and relax because they think the game's won. So I think it's quite individual. But I've certainly, when we've won and it's not been to the standard I would expect, I've been harsh on the team. And similarly, when we've lost but played really, really well, I've been really positive. So I think I try and focus on the process and the performance, trying to take out the result and the outcome as much as possible. But I think that is quite valuable. But again, it's doing it at the right time, because if your team is on a good run of results and they're performing really well, and then they win a game, and then you really nail them for it, and you say, I'm not worried about the result, it's about the performance, and you go quite strong with it, you could send out a conflicting message because they've been on such a good run, and you've been maybe possibly celebrating and enjoying those results and giving really good feedback, and then all of a sudden, I think it works with adults. You can do it because they're old enough, their life experience, and they understand enough that they could deal with that.
Yeah.
But when you're working with young players and all of a sudden your manner changes because of a dislike to a performance, that can have a destabling effect.
Yeah.
I think consistency is really important in coaching young players. But it's when you do see coaches on the sideline, and I'm sure you see even more in grassroots. I've not been around grassroots as much in recent years because of coaching in academies, but certainly there's the parent coach that will go to work on the Monday morning and brag about their team's results and post it on Twitter and those sorts of things. And I think that's the issue. Like I say, leave the competition to the players and the winning and losing, and let them celebrate and deal with that. I think when the adults, or it gets into the wrong hands of certain adults, that's when it becomes a problem.
Thanks for joining the conversation. If any of this has sparked an interest in you, check out our resources in the description below to go and find out about the sources and links to learn more on your own. Here's how you can add to the discussion. First, you can agree or disagree on our position by commenting below. You can engage with others who have stated their stance. And finally, if you have a quote or a topic area that you'd like to suggest to us, please leave us with that information because your opinion matters. May the myths be dispelled and the truth stick.